Welcome. In this lesson, we'll conclude our introduction to measure theory. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to answer the following questions. What is the difference between an observation and a case? What are reporting segments? And what is the difference in component classes? Each of these concepts has a meaningful impact on how you'll want to configure measures in Ursa Studio. In Ursa Studio, cases and observations are terms with specific meanings. The difference between a case and an observation is important because the distinction governs some of the platform's functionality. An observation is the fundamental unit of analysis of a measure. Observations are the lowest level grain of data associated with the measure. So, observations are the records with the most detail. For some temporal structures, observations roll up to the case level grain, which is often a patient. For example, these two tables present data for the same PM-PM measure. Table 1 presents data at the case level, where claim level observations associated with each patient are rolled up to the patient. In contrast, Table 2 presents the claim level observations for patient 10165. At this level, we're not seeing the patient's case. Rather, we see the observations associated with the patient. For some temporal structures, there is no distinction between an observation and a case because there is no grain rollup. For example, this table, which is associated with a count measure, presents one row per patient. Since the measure is counting the number of CKD patients, there are no observations to roll up to the case, which in this case would be the patient. The next concept that I want to introduce is reporting segments. This is how we describe the reporting period that observations are assigned to. For example, a reporting segment could be a month or it might be a quarter, and any observations that occurred during that reporting segment are associated with that segment. This concept is so fundamental to data analytics and reporting that it would not bear mention except to say that different temporal structures interact with reporting segments differently, as we saw in the previous lesson. Now, the last concept to introduce is that of component classes. There are two component classes, normal and long form. This concept refers to the relationship between the denominator observation and the numerator observation. With a normal form measure, every denominator observation has at most one numerator record associated with it. So there's a possibility for a one-to-one relationship between the denominator and the numerator's records. For example, outpatient GFR lab after discharge is a normal form measure. The numerator object restricts records to the first GFR within 45 days of discharge. This restriction, of course, ensures that there's at most one GFR record. In this case, there could be a one-to-one relationship between the denominator observation, which is the hospital discharge, and the numerator record, which is the GFR. There could also be a zero numerator record, and that would still be a normal form structure because a normal form component class is one in which for each denominator observation there is at most one numerator record. In contrast, The long form component class is one where there can be any number of numerator records associated with a single denominator observation. So, long form measures can have more than one relationship between denominator observations and numerator records. A PM-PM measure is a great example of the long form component class. In this case, the denominator observation is a month during which a member can have more than one claim record documented. A member may have 10 claims in January. So, during the January reporting segment, there would be a many to one relationship between the member and the number of claims associated with the member. The idea driving the component class is to specify whether the measure should expect the possibility that there are multiple numerator records for each denominator observation. This helps clarify which aggregate function to use when calculating the final result. Component class indicates whether the relationship between the denominator observations and the numerator records is at most one to one or one to many. Now you know the difference between an observation and a case, what we mean by reporting segments, and the difference between normal and long form component classes. This lesson concludes our foray into measure theory, but we'll continue to review these concepts throughout future lessons. So don't worry if there are a few details that still aren't completely clear. In fact, much of this course is organized by temporal structure and component class. We'll complete an in-depth review of how to create a measure for each temporal structure component class combination. Well, thank you for taking the time to review this lesson, and I'll look forward to catching you in the next one.